This session's quite a get real session. You've heard quite a bit in the last 2 days around the whole digital transformation, the white paper that we've launched, and you've probably heard quite a bit of theory and some pronouncements about maybe actions we should be taking. What you're going to hear today is from some guys very much at the sharp end. So we've got 3 great talks coming through. What we'll try and do here is we want this to be interactive as far as we can. We want you to get as much information from today as we can provide. So you're going to hear from Gordon at BT. You're also going to hear from Tom and Carl, who've been working at the sharp end, trying to make systems and services work despite migration from the old analog world to a digital world. So this is probably quite a crucial session. You could get a lot out of this if you think through your Q&A that goes with it. So I think the running order we're trying to go with here, if you think about yesterday's white paper launch, we want to get a really strong perspective from Gordon. Most of you will have heard from Gordon. He gave you the overview story of BT this morning. He's going to try and pick through that to make the stronger links to our industry and what we can actually do in practice. So you're going to hear more from Gordon shortly. And then let's see what's happening on the ground, particularly around Scotland and maybe the south coast of England, as to what these guys have experienced in terms of making it work. So with no more ado, I'm going to introduce Gordon Cannon.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, back under the lights. And at the risk of repeating myself, because some of these slides are the same slides that I presented just before lunch, but what I wanted to do was try and go into a slightly deeper level of detail on just a couple of subjects. So you heard before lunch, BT's plan of record is to transform all of its customers from analog to digital by 2025. And I laid out a little bit about what the service is going to look like and what some of the impacts are for your industry. I think in this session, I want to talk about the test facility and the backwards and the forwards compatibility, and a little bit about the consideration that we've already taken within BT, within the product teams and the research and development teams about, and the customer experience teams particularly, on what will the customer experience be as they move to digital voice from analog voice, especially if they have additional special services, whether that's tech services and telecare services, whether that's fire alarms in their home or security alarms in their home. This is just a slide, an additional slide that's kind of painting the picture that this isn't necessarily something that BT and or Vodafone Cable and Wireless or KCOM or Virgin or any of the other TalkTalk or Sky are choosing to do to a particular industry. This is a global trend. The switches that BT put in that run the analog phone service were put in originally in 1984, which is quite some considerable time ago. And as you might imagine, spares are a bit getting thinner on the ground and repairs are needing to be done to keep the network running. So the message is 2025 of the plan of record really does need to happen for BT. There's a lot of compelling reasons why in the workforce and the skills of that workforce approaching retirement age, as well as the actual switch fabric itself, the technology that runs it, and its anticipated lifespan. That means we will be getting there. And it's been done all around the world by a variety of different operators already. So we're not first, and we can learn a lot of good lessons from that, what went before. All right, so if we just talk about the test centre. So I think for us, it's really important when the leadership coach that followed me, I forget his name now, Steve, what was his name? This morning, that did the NHS map and digital and all the rest of it. Yes, and he was talking about unintended consequences and levers and grip, that in order for your industry to make the right decisions about what you need to do for your customers, we in the communications network need to give you the options. If we increase our grip and we say we're just going to move to all IP and you will have to move on this date and you get no flexibility, it will be like a ripple through the industry and there'll be a lot of unintended consequences. Some of them I anticipate will probably be quite bad consequences. So the reason for doing dongles and test facilities and allowing people to continue to use analog devices in the transformation period is to basically empower you guys to choose when you want to move. Clearly, what we want, and the message in the white paper, is all IP is better. It's an all IP future. That network is largely in the ground and continues to be expanded and will do over the next 7 years, but that is the future. So native digital IP applications for your industry is the end game, definitely. So start now. The launch of the product is in 2018. Some of the conversations that I've been involved with so far over the 2 days that I've been here, or a day and a half that I've been here, have been focusing on the 2025 date as being the most important date, as if by some way kind of saying, well, we've got until 2025, we don't need to do anything yet. And I also want to bust that myth, because this will start to happen to your customers in 2018 when BT starts moving their customers to the digital voice service. So this isn't something that's going to happen in X number of years' time. This is something that's going to happen in, broadly speaking, 12 months' time. Hence the need to get on and start to transform to all IP. I'm just going to click through a few of these. This wasn't in the original slide this morning, and I'm not convinced actually that as an audience it really helps you, because it was more to illustrate for the security industry what was happening on the network. They have very specific requirements around wiring in the home and wiring back towards the exchange in order to be able to provide some of the monitored alarm services underpinning security companies like ADT and such like. But it just basically reinforces the fact that we're coming away from a phone service provided by Openreach, and we're moving all of the phone services up, away from that regulated business, into retail communication providers. It won't be what BT does, but you can imagine that there might be communication providers out there going forward that will choose to offer just broadband services, and they won't offer a voice service as part of their package. They'll assume that people will use their mobile for voice, perhaps. I did this diagram this morning, and that's just talking about the voice service moving away from the socket and us binning the extension wiring. Okay, I think in addition to the technical standards that I talked to this morning, the communications marketplace, now comprising of, I think Ofcom would say there's kind of 200 service providers in the UK market. I did actually work in the wholesale division up until 3 years ago, and when I was in the wholesale division, they had about 1,200 communication providers buying wholesale services from them, so I think it's slightly more than that. But 200 communication providers operating in the market, all with various different types of networks. And I think some of you have experienced problems with interworking and interoperability between IP networks as they move from one state of analog to another state, being all digital. And what I would say on that is that the NICC is the standards group for the communications industry. BT has representation on a subcommittee which is currently accountable for delivering the new digital IP standards, and that will be done by the end of December. And whilst I talked about the test facility for you guys to be able to come in and bring devices and bring services and test them on the live network, perhaps didn't articulate well enough or in enough detail that because that is live network, if there are alarm receiving centres sitting on Virgin or Sky or whomever, alternative service providers, when you're making those tests, you will actually be testing all of those interconnects as well. Now, there are no guarantees when we're talking about network transport, and I think it's fair to say that you get failure rates today to varying degrees. But what I can say is there will be a huge emphasis of effort from Ofcom and from BT in making sure that we have correctly configured the equipment in the network, and that we'll be working to minimise those occurrences of problems with the translation from analog to all IP. I think that's it, Steve. I think in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. We're going to move into Q&A at the end. So could I ask, just whilst we're swapping speakers, I think Tom's going to move on up there. Could I just ask that you make some mental notes of your Q&A? We're going to get all three speakers through quite quickly and then go into that question and answer session if we could. Thank you. So let me introduce Tom. Tom Morton is Chief Executive.
Hi. Good afternoon. It's the first time I get to maybe have a wee dance around here on the stage. It's the first time I've ever had such a big stage and a big audience. So, a life-changing decision is my presentation today. And a wee bit of background about ourselves at Communicare. We're a relatively new company in terms of the industry. However, we've been trying to be digital since 1998. And we've been trying to assist the telecare industry to make a transition between an analog system to a digital system. There's been lots of challenges, not necessarily related to the capabilities of our system, but more about the capabilities of the infrastructure that's available to you guys. There's a lot of lack of information, lack of infrastructure, and that's causing us some challenges, but that's now, it looks like it's becoming overcome now. Our expertise, though, lies in our mobile capability, our location-based services, and the ability to create alert monitoring and management of that system. We have a completely scalable infrastructure already in the clouds, and we've been in the clouds for a number of years, and we're operating to some already tight security standards within the security industry, which is our original pedigree. We've lots of engagement, lots of discussion, including with Scottish Government, the NHS and local government, to find out that we're aligned with all of the relative strategies. We don't want to be trying to deliver anything that's going against anybody's policies or strategic directions. We've also engaged heavily with some Swedish counterparts, with some of the partners out there. We've spoken with some of the municipalities. I'm not quite sure how that, anyway, the councils. And we've also had a good conversation about the Swedish Standards Institute and how they've involved a protocol called SCAPE. So this is back in 2015 when we first started on the journey. And at that time, we also engaged to find out what technology-enabled care equipment was available within that scale. So we engaged with all the major manufacturers at that time. What we found was a limited array of digital technology providers and a lot of limited scale niche innovators. There was no particular end-to-end digital ARC software available at that time. There was no end-to-end digital ARC infrastructure either. Does everyone understand ARC, Alarm Receiving Center, Monitoring Center? There were two main digital tech providers, DoroCare and Neat, and all the innovators that were out there doing really creative stuff were kind of stifled by the existing analog monitoring infrastructures, and they couldn't really get any scale out of it. There was also not very much in the way of benefits coming back, so nobody could actually measure the outcomes properly because there was no scale. There were challenges ahead. Ofcom clearly saying PSTN services are going to cease by 2025, and you just heard from Gordon about the planned migration for that. So everyone's urging us to act now and to get your planning in place, and I want to tell you a bit more now about our own experiences. We all know that there are silo data and silo data processes within this sector. And what we have to be mindful of as we progress to digital is that we don't just replicate what we're currently doing in an analog sense by holding on to data ourselves and holding on to that kind of control element and within a silo of server mentality. and then replicate that with a digital server mentality. We must look to see if we can get shared open standards and open protocols. So let's look at the current situation. We've got an analog end-to-end system within our alarm receiving center and the homes. Citizens are connected from a home connection through a copper wire, through to a PSTN network, and then into a responder infrastructure such as an alarm receiving center. And that's all done by copper. But the question is, have we got a failed call risk? The answer is yes, we have. The problem right now is that there's no proper reporting mechanisms to understand exactly what the scale of those failures are, because the softwares that are there don't tell us how many calls we've received. They tell us how many calls the alarm center has received and the alarm center software. So we believe we've got 100% of call acceptance. And we also are willing to accept that sometimes people don't press their buttons. And my challenge to you is, are we absolutely certain about that? If the equipment is not connected and we don't understand that the equipment is connected, how can we say that it hasn't been successful? Currently, we're moving to what's called a hybrid system at the minute. We've got a mixture of technology in the infrastructure systems. We've got connected homes. We're starting to see some more and more smart homes coming through. We're starting to see a mix of smart technology and a mix of analog telephony within people's homes. We're also now seeing a mixture of networks. As BT progresses, so too are other providers. And those other providers are already rolling out fiber networks now. So we have a mixture of network infrastructure in the middle. And at the end of it, we still have, not all, but we still have mainly analog responder networks. So we have a mixed infrastructure. And again, that creates failed call risk. This time it's slightly exacerbated because now what we have is a mix of analog communication protocols translated over a digital infrastructure and then retranslated back to analog again at the other end. So there's a number of conversions taking place within the data signaling. And that's increasing the level of failure risk. Utopia is an ultimate digital end-to-end. This is where we start to see far more benefits. All of the connectivity is taken care of in terms of smart home. And I know we all talk about the Alexas and all that. That's today's technology, but it will be tomorrow's implementation. It's still on that hype curve. Citizens' homes, however, will be digital. They will all be connected on an IP core, and certainly by 2025, there won't be any alternative options. That's what you'll have in your home. Within that context of digital network infrastructure, you've now started to bring in the urban environment. And the urban environment, because it's connected to the internet, will also be able to be used in terms of your assessments and how you manage your citizens moving forward. And the support network, the alarm receiving centers, and your first responders are all going to be also digitally connected. And at that point, your whole options change for your moving forward. So the current day is existing services are being phased out. We've now got a BT migration plan announced. There's a voluntary option to move now, but there is going to be a mandatory switch. And I think that slide, Gordon, you've just updated it slightly. So I had 2020, you think now it's 2021, I think. Did I get picked up from your slide?
Voluntary from 2018, and then 2020, 2022, it will be planned migration with everyone all fully migrated by 2025.
Okay, so I pulled that off the Ofcom announcement, so that's where that was. So. And we're already aware that other providers, such as Virgin, TalkTalk, in fact, BSkyB, I think is another one, are already beginning these migrations now. So you've already got that mixed infrastructure. And some of our citizens connected to your telecare systems are already affected. Sweden, from their own experience, their decision to move was caused by a death, caused by a fatality caused by the infrastructure change. There was an analog failure, and that caused the death. That was the reason Sweden moved. This is some real-term statistics taken from some examinations we did in Scotland. This is a housing provider. It's 10,000, actually about 13,000 citizens in total. These are the calls in and out on the left-hand side. The calls in and out, that's a total calls between the building and outside of the building. The calls in was to the building, and then the alarm calls received were by the software used by the housing provider. So you can see there's a disconnect of the number of calls received to the phone switchboard and the number of calls received by the software. That call failure rate runs at average 2.6% over 6 months. If you extrapolate those figures, in Scotland, that equates to 2.6% of 3.7 million inbound calls. That's 94,500 failed calls. For the UK, if you extrapolate that at 1.7 million users, 42 million inbound calls, that's 1.07 million failed calls. Now, bearing in mind that's 2.6%. This is what happened if you look at it from a type. So we extrapolated from Falkirk Council the number of calls by the different type of alert calls. And you can see there, falls, mobile responders, fire brigade, that's old language, by the way. Police, ambulance, and no voice contact. So all the way through there, you can see the extrapolation of at 2.6% based on 1.5% of falls incidents, 6% of mobile responders, etc. So that's a huge amount of calls, which means basically 534 calls are not making it to the police, 2,500 are not making it to the fire station, and 1,500 are not making it to the ambulance service. So that's the impact as we extrapolate those numbers. The reality, though, if we look at Falkirk, who've continued their monitoring, if I can draw your attention, December through to February, we had a significant rise caused by a couple of changeovers in the network providers within their local area. That saw a peak in February 17 of 12.3% failed calls. What we did was we deployed some Doro GSM equipment, which went out to the units, and at that point, the calls immediately fell back down to 1%. We deployed 512 or so devices. And that rollout was immediately addressing that particular concern. I came back to fairly normal. Obviously, there's a remaining 3,500 users still on Analogue, and that brought the call ratios back down to 1%. So the analysis was done on effectively 12% of the call services in Scotland. There was a peak of 12%, but we also highlighted a few other areas of notable interest. So asset register, how do we maintain a control of the peripheral devices and the base units? How do we record our equipment failures? How do we record the connectivity failures? And how do we maintain actual call statistics? So the best approach we found is to, first of all, identify the partners you want to work with, and that's your internal partners as well as your external partners. Establish how you're going to call monitor. So by looking at your IT systems, looking at the inbound call loggings, looking at the actual calls received by your software, and establishing whether you've got a delta, a change that needs to be managed. Then identify your local telcos. Who are your consumers, your citizens currently using for provision of telephone services? Because currently they're paying that bill. So you need to understand how many of your citizens are using BT, how many are using TalkTalk, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've established that, you can then talk to the telcos and establish their migration plan within your local area to try and transition and plan ahead. Falkirk have done this exercise. They've already appraised their entire corporate management team. They've identified that they need to do an analog telecare system upgrade, and they've identified that they have call failure rates. They've placed their analog to digital program onto the corporate risk register, which is vital. It's going to be taken seriously by senior management. And they've informed all their council officers of the delivery options available to them. They're making sure that they're participating in the Scottish Government's agendas, making sure that they're participating in the workflows for procurement, etc. And They're now identifying the funding streams to get on with the job. That includes co-design of an integrated digital community system, application to Innovate UK for some funding to make sure that scale deployment happens throughout and commencing from March 2018. It's an interesting point that given the existing council budgets, for them to achieve that migration plan based on existing spend, it will take them 9 years to transition 3,500 to 4,000 people. And 9 years, if you do your maths, is way beyond 2025. Falkirk Council would like to achieve by 2021 4,500 digital technology-enabled care services with 24-hour alarm receiving centre services, 24-hour mobile responder services, and a fully integrated health and social care partnership with their local NHS. Of course, you can do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Gosh, that 12% really brings it home. But to be fair, Tom and the team at Falkirk have been grappling with that and addressing it, but you just bring it to life. So last but not least, I want to introduce Carl Atke, CTO at Apello. Thank you.
So I'd like to start with the question, what is digital? And that question is very different for different groups of people. So if we ask some of our service users, they'll respond to that by saying it's Sky TV, or it's Facebook, or it's Skype talking to their relatives in far off places. If you talk to housing associations or service providers, care providers, they will give you the answer, different answers, in as much that it's about connected home or it's about IoT devices. And recently we've deployed some connectors into the Fitbit cloud to pull down data about a certain customer's residence so that they can get a well-being score for those residents using that type of consumable device. So for them, that is their digital journey. For us as a monitoring and an installation business, digital is more about how do we make the digital alarms more effective, more reliable, and more scalable than they currently are. So we, as a monitoring business, have been around for a little while. We have 206,000 connected devices currently, and we have a bespoke platform that we've developed with a partner of ours to deliver digital connected devices. Digital for us is about the opportunity to transition the business into a real digital provider. Okay, so the connected base of 200,000 connected devices, we need to protect that, and we need to protect that as the networks migrate. 200,000 connected devices represents 4.2 million calls per year into our centre. So we've started to move the business towards a digital world. We've started to move at scale digital devices out to residents, and we have 3,000 connected digital end-to-end customers connected to our centre currently. Some of the drivers, as Gordon has alluded to earlier, some of the drivers are the change in networks. 2025, if we get to 2025, the job will be done. It is now that there is a problem. There is now that there's a problem because we don't know the scale of the issue. And that's why we're driving towards this move over to digital services. Ofcom have identified that other service providers have already started migrating services. And in fact, in 2012, during the London Olympics, there was a congestion problem around London and services were migrated across to a different provider. Our alarm failure rate went up tenfold during that period. Okay, so we know that the effect of moving across to digital networks can have a negative impact on analog alarm events. So, what does it mean? This is a fairly technical explanation on the slide. In real terms, analog alarm messages do not like digital networks. They get a round-trip delay. Gordon and Tom have spoken about when you hop from an analog network onto a digital network, that is actually compounded across those networks. And those alarm events then fail. And the alarm events, they don't necessarily fail catastrophically, but at the very best, the service user is getting a very delayed response from the ARC. And that is because of that DTMF message structure not passing across those networks. So for us, as Apello, with all those alarm devices, in June this year, our alarm failure rate was around about 8%. We've worked with our platform provider to actually have mechanisms to define what those failures are, and we can actually see them in real time and report against them. So we know that 8% is a true representation of alarm failures into our desk at that point. 8% of calls is 28,000 alarm failed in that month. Okay, so that's a significant number. And we're expecting it, because of that increase over the next few months, we're expecting that to be in double figures by January, okay, which would represent closer to 30-odd thousand failed events during the month. So we've had a driver to move our services across to digital services. We've deployed end-to-end connected digital devices, and it's had not only that negative stuff about call failure, it's had some positive impacts on moving to a digital service. Our alarm termination time has dropped from 100 seconds for analog devices to 3 seconds for digital devices. Okay, we're experiencing that with all the sites that we've put in, and that is a very reliable and consistent piece of performance. We have multiple sites, multiple calls from each site. So each site can layer on to the monitoring center as many calls as the bandwidth for the site will allow, okay, which can sometimes cause problems for the monitoring center, but it does at least allow multiple calls to be processed. And we can do other things such as location services. Because these digital services are using very rich data packets, we can send more information to the monitoring center. So something that's eluded us for a while is about location services on a scheme where a resident would press a pendant and you wouldn't actually know where they are in the property. Now we can send information relating to a local area within that network and send that to the monitoring center so they have more rich information. Other things that we have enabled on our deployments are we have greater social engagement. The residents have been overawed by the amount of access they have to being able to speak to other people, either on-site or off-site, using the capabilities of the platform. We have much richer data, so we now append the on-site call traffic to the off-site call traffic. So MI is much richer, much more accurate, and much more useful to the B2B customer. Aesthetics and usability has changed. We were worried when we first started deploying that the uptake of the residents would be happy to use it. We've got a very simple user interface that we've developed, and they do adopt that technology quite readily. And we've also got the capability of downloading applications onto those environments so that people can use other devices connected to their home. So, 3,000 residents already using our services digitally. These are some of the statistics. This is all 3,000 were surveyed. The strongest one on there for us is 57% of people said that their well-being improved because they could have a video conference call with their neighbours. And we're really, really proud of that statistic. So not just about alarm reliability, but also about social inclusion. So, in summary, a digital transition of telecoms network has already started. We've seen it, we've experienced it, we're seeing the numbers increase. The telecare sector is being impacted by these risks, and the risks are increasing day by day. A truly end-to-end digital solution will mitigate those risks. It will definitely do, we have seen that. And the benefits of digital are far more reaching than just resilience. It's about social inclusion, and it's about all the other services that you can layer on. That's it.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much. Okay, we're over to Q&A. So hopefully this is really bringing the subject to life for you. We talked about the theory of this quite a bit in the last few hours and days. these guys are right at the sharp end. So, Gordon, Tom and Carl, they're in there ahead of the game fixing the problem, real issues, 12% failure rates, crikey. I think it's a good opportunity for you to grill these guys with a few more Q&A. I've received 2 or 3 questions offline, but let's see if there's any questions from the floor first. Could we have the lights up a little bit? I can't see into the audience much. Whoever's controlling that. Any questions? There's one in the middle there. If we have a microphone, please. Just coming your way.
This question's for Mr. BT man.
Gordon.
I was a wee bit surprised at the thing you said about adapters, that you're going to help by providing adapters, because my limited understanding from what we learned from Sweden was that was a bad idea because it introduces another new potential point of failure.
So as I said this morning...
Get the microphone.
Am I mic'd up?
Yeah. Working.
So as I said this morning, the adapters are being put into the home hub to allow the analog devices to work over the digital network. The rationale for that is to allow people to move all of their equipment over time and not to have a situation, if I paint the alternative situation, which is we're moving a particular customer and they have to change all of their equipment all at the same time as they move to digital, which isn't entirely practical. The test centre is going to be available for testing the devices to make sure of what works and what doesn't work, so that we are not in a position where it doesn't work. And to the points that have been raised by the gentleman to my left here about cross-network reliability, I believe that the NICC standards that will be completed by the end of December will help address that. I believe that the test centre on the live network from BT's perspective will be able to test cross-networks for alarm receiving centres with different providers, so we'll know when we're doing those testing what works and what doesn't across those networks. And I know from past experience running the global voice platform, I put in a call hammer platform to test all of the international connections to make sure that all the connections were working. And we have a network management centre that is actively looking at the PSTN and the IP voice network and what the performance of the calls and the call failure rates are over that network. I'm sure these guys have seen those kind of failure rates across the network, but it's not something that we would aspire to provide, and I don't recognise them as things that we would be happy with internally within our network operation. So it's a fine line that we walk, but we're going to make every attempt to make it as safe as possible. Without a shadow of a doubt, there are other characteristics of the digital network, like the need to have local power, that actually drive up the service risk for you and your users, probably more so necessarily than I see the call failure rates across networks, which I think will be addressed by the NICC.
Okay.
Well, it needs to be addressed by the NICC.
Perhaps I can just make a link back to yesterday's conversation with Ofcom. What God's alluding to is, do you remember we said there were various working sessions, and if you look at the connection between an end user and a monitoring centre, you could actually pass through various communication providers. You may be using BT at one end, the customer might be buying Sky, and you might encounter other networks in the middle. And what was coming out of the Ofcom meetings was that actually it's the interaction of some of those networks, the boundaries between them, which is almost one of the causes of the issue. And at the same time, what we found is that some of the failure modes were almost transient. So things seemed to work one day and not the next, and so on. So in fact, this was a related question that came in, was around this topic. It was, we've got this wonderful offer that BT are going to provide a test facility, and that's great, that's BT. It's how do you make sure the whole thing works and is reliable? How do we make sure we're not building on a false sense of security? Remember we talked about what happens that day when everyone's downloading millions of episodes of Great British Bake Off or whatever. You know, a heavily loaded network might make a difference too. But I think that's what you're alluding to, Gordon. There's more work to be done with NICC to work through that bigger puzzle. Is that right?
Yeah, there's definitely more work to be done. I mean, they have been tasked by to come back to Ofcom with the new standards that will be ratified for all of the IP interconnect for all of the communication providers by the end of December. So there'll be definitive technical standards for it. As far as the test facility goes, it is the live network, and so if we have, effectively you always then have a BT consumer out to other networks, but for alarm receiving centres that are on alternative networks, be them Sky or Virgin or TalkTalk, if you're testing equipment against that, you are actually testing it over the live network and the live interconnect. It's not a lab, it is the live network. Good. So I hope that gives some confidence of the validity of the testing.
Thank you. Next question, there's one down the front.
Hi. At the moment, we're actually able to give our clients the backup that if a power outage happened, with a battery backup, most of them have 24 hours, some 30, they'd still be able to use the phone line. And obviously, if we're digital, my understanding is that that phone line won't work without any electricity. Am I right in thinking that that means that then we've only got a SIM card option as a backup, in which case it means that every client that we have to provide for now becomes much more expensive? And therefore, I guess my question is, Mr. Apello, what's your plan? Will you then have to charge more to your clients to cover that cost?
So we've, on the sites that we've deployed, we have broadband services as the primary connector. We also have mobile devices as fallback, but we also can use an analog service to fall back onto as well. So whilst those services are available, we are deploying them as fallback on those schemes.
But has that then made it more expensive for your clients,
Well,
because you've had to use a SIM card?
If you take a broadband service, you will be provided with an analog line anyway. So we just use that primary line as the delivery of the broadband into that service. So we just fall back to that.
So when that goes, what will you then do? What's your plan?
But we still have GSM, so we would fall back to GSM if we didn't have any IP services.
I think you're right. There is a fallback to a cellular connector device which does have a SIM card and does have a cost. So if you look at those systems we heard about yesterday in Sweden and elsewhere, somebody somewhere has got to pick up the cost, an ongoing communication cost. You're absolutely right. And that's part of one of the actions that the TSA paper describes is the lobbying we want to help with to find where is that transitional funding. How do we make sure you cover that, whatever it might be, £1 or £2 per month per user? So it's a real cost.
Thank you.
Other questions, please? One at the back there behind you.
I'm not sure whether I sort of missed something, but just harking back to the point about the sort of reliability of the cable network. My concern is about the fact that our current experience of sort of use of the internet and sort of broadband is that frequently when you're using that service you find that the service sort of drops out. For instance, I mean, I have BT Infinity at home, which of course means that I've got a short bit of copper wire that sort of runs to my house from the cabinet. If I have a torrential downpour, I find that some of my services stop working. So what's being done to sort of address that? It just seems to me that sort of running, IP services over copper for the future is not, it's not particularly sensible. So what's being done to sort of upgrade the network, as it were?
And what, take that?
Shall I take that?
Yeah, go on.
So it's disappointing, first of all, to hear that you're having some service issues with your Infinity, so maybe I need to take that away and see what needs to happen, because downpour or not, you should not necessarily be taking out your Infinity line to the point where you don't have any service whatsoever. The network and operations team continue to try and drive in reliability into the broadband network, so that will continue to improve over time. As far as in relation to this service, and it's partly related to the last question as well, Ofcom recognise that the direction of travel here for faster broadband ultimately, if they had their way and government had their way, it would be fibre all the way to people's homes. And that's glass, obviously, and not copper. And so there is no way of delivering remote power into people's homes is going to be subject to these power outages. So addressing that requires us to think differently. And they're thinking differently in terms of network resilience. So it's broadband first, potentially, but with a mobile backup. And because mobile devices are not as power hungry as a home hub, for example, then you can run them for longer, 24 hours, 30 hours, more, I guess, if it's just a mobile phone. I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but my understanding, rough, rudimentary understanding, is that they last for longer. But it's about that network resilience. So if you guys in this tech sector need to guarantee that an alarm that's raised in a dispersed person's home gets to an alarm receiving centre, you need to have multiple network options.
So
if you don't today, for example, you don't know, for example, an Analogue device that's plugged in, actually that call ever makes it necessarily. You have no way of tracking that today. The good news with digital is you will have going forward.
So I don't think you've missed the issue at all. I think you've hit the nail on the head with one of the key topics in the white paper, which is we've grown used to one particular environment and a regulatory environment where you've got a very good resilient telephone network, and that's changing. We know we've all had our individual problems with internet access one way or another. Power issues will persist. What we're really saying in the white paper is we collectively need to address that regulatory environment and the standards to make sure that we specify the right sort of systems. They do fall back to different ways of working, that they are still resilient. So it is exactly a central issue. Okay, next question. I think there's one down on the left, down there. Oh, sorry. And then one to the left, please.
Hi there. We've heard a lot about telecare and alarm receiving centres. I wondered if or how telehealth will be affected.
Shall I pick up on that one to start with while the guys are thinking about it? So I've worked across techs, including telehealth, and actually what you find today is most of the telehealth systems are already generally IP connected, is one issue. The other is generally the telehealth systems are not real-time critical. The information they carry is hugely critical, but it doesn't have to be there every second. It doesn't do too much damage if it's minutes or 30 minutes later. So I think you've got different parameters to deal with. So far, we've not heard huge nightmare stories around telehealth systems. Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay. I think there was one question to the left as well. Did that answer that one? Yeah.
I don't know if I'm being very simplistic, but wouldn't a help be with regard to the power outages that as we know we're going to digital, that all routers produced come with a backup battery supply so that we start installing them in people's homes now, and also for existing routers if the providers would supply a retrofit power cable with a backup battery supply.
Gordon, would you like to start with that one?
Yes. It's a very good point raised. So,
but with them, you know, because of the quantities, it would obviously be sort of a smaller cost per unit because they're sort of producing them in the hundreds of thousands.
So we have looked at this in a level of detail. And first and foremost, for the people who are registered with BT as vulnerable or disabled, if they take this IP voice service, they will be provided with a battery backup for 1 hour for the hub. The issues are all around the power consumption of the hub and the safety, inherent safety, of providing batteries mass market into people's homes. So, you know, Galaxy Note was very famously exploding in people's hands, much to the embarrassment of Samsung not too long ago. Lithium-ion batteries come with increased, it's a different risk, but there is still an inherent risk in trying to deploy those in mass market.
We have 1.7 million alarms installed in the UK at the moment, which all have standby batteries inside them.
Well, maybe let's test the answer I got to your... I asked exactly the same questions a while ago, and we started with discussion around boxes in the home and battery backup, and we were heading exactly down this path. With that sort of volume, couldn't you get to something that's reliable and affordable? But we ran into a different issue, which was whilst you might then sustain the power in your home, What we found is that things like the other components of the network, like the box in the street, itself has battery backup and it's shorter. So you can do all you like in the home, but eventually you run out of steam in the network 1 mile down the road, so you still lose power. That was the answer I got last time.
Yeah, we've been talking to Ofcom for years about local power issues in the new world of, be it fibre or VDSL, cabinet, broadband. And the conclusions that we've drawn so far is it's not practical. It comes with so many operational disadvantages. We have to think different. And the think different is multiple network resilience and wireless network resilience, because it's less power, it consumes less power, and is available from a distance like the exchanges were, and things like that. So that's the direction of travel, rather than trying to make sure that we put big packs into people's houses. It brings up renewal issues, management issues, safety issues, a whole heap of things arrive when you start talking about putting battery packs into the house.
And I think also we should bear in mind that we're going to be far better informed about how connectivity affects us. We're also going to be far better informed in terms of our systems. So we can mitigate a lot of risks by responding quicker and responding better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's maybe an add-on to this as well. Do you remember when our colleagues from Sweden were talking yesterday? They've already migrated thousands of these systems to IP connections, but nearly all of them are based on cellular connections. And part of the issue there was you can't assume that older, frailer resident has necessarily bought a broadband connection, and you need to deploy quickly. And actually the smartest way to do that was to give them a box which already had an IP cellular connection. And if you do that, that in itself can have a battery backup. So I think there are other ways possibly of solving the problem at a system level. Any other questions? I've got one more coming for Tom that's already come in, but any more around the audience? Let me, while you're thinking, let me play this one back for Tom. Part of the commentary we heard yesterday was we're all here, it's all a little bit new for us as a tech community talking about these IP connected devices, and we're a little bit, well, what does it mean? How do we make it reliable and secure? But you've already been dealing with this in adjacent sectors, things like lone workers and security.
Yeah.
So the question of, how do you build these digital propositions and still make sure they always work when you need them to work? You've already dealt with this. So is there a magic bullet?
There isn't a magic bolt. You have to just try and think through all of the risk options. You have to look at the scalability of your platform. You have to make sure, as Carl's probably done for his own platform and system, you make sure you try and look at all the mitigate and fail-safes that you can. There's a huge responsibility, I think, on the tech providers and the manufacturers of equipment within homes to make sure that they've got that resilient piece. But scalability is all about how much data you're going to be managing and how quickly you can deal with that data and process that data in order to get it to the alarm centre in particular in this instance, or to the first responders in a meaningful way. So I think there's a problem that people haven't yet understood, and that is the sheer quantity of data that's now going to be coming to their systems. A small-scale deployment is one thing when you're doing small amounts of tech, but when you start to look at 2,500 and then 10,000 and then 25,000 before you know 100,000 digital connections, then that's an awful lot of data being processed through your systems. So unless you're in the cloud and you've got that cloud capability, then ultimately there's going to be a problem.
Yeah. So you need to rethink the back end as well as the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole system has to be considered all the way through.
Great. I received one of the questions for Carl, more of a commercial model question, but anything else around the audience here? Can I go into the last one I've got? Oh, sorry, there's one right at the back on the right, I think.
Thanks. I'd just like some clarification on your statistics. The 2.3% failure rate, was that of an analogue network or of a new digital network?
Is that for me?
Who's that
Scottish gentleman in the middle.
I'm still struggling to get the...
Tom.
I'm getting a lot of feedback on this, and I'm struggling with the question. So did I hear say, was that 2.3% on an analogue network?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then
That was analog devices with
Yeah.
a relatively unknown telecommunications infrastructure, I suppose, is the
Sure.
answer.
And then sort of the follow-up question for the gentleman from Appello. What failure rates have you seen on your whole digital platform?
but we have seen 8% failure of analog devices talking into our desk. The failure rates on digital are virtually nothing at the moment. There are 56 schemes deployed covering 3,000 people. So it's quite a lot of people, but it's a small amount of schemes in the scale of things. So we're seeing very reliable data transmission using IP protocols. So we only see failure when we're doing things like the commissioning process and setting the schemes up and doing configuration work. So in live operation, they've been highly reliable.
And thank you. And I appreciate the extrapolation on the analog failure rates and saying, you know, these calls won't get through, you know, to whoever. But am I missing something here? Because, you know, surely if you pull in the device, it automatically redials anyway, and that's why within the sector we don't hear a huge amount of noise with a 2.3% failure rate.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling.
We're getting reverberation from that corner. Sorry,
Yeah.
we're not really hearing that well. Were you saying something about we got 2.3%, but we got redial attempts, therefore have we got a problem? Is that what?
Yeah, sorry, that's effectively it.
That's probably
Sorry, I still never heard the question. Sorry.
I think if I try and play back the question, it was you got an initial failed rate of received alarms at 2.3%.
Yeah.
But these alarms were set up to redial and do other things. So were you actually seeing a net problem?
Okay, so what we're seeing is a number of things. We've got a corruption happening somewhere, and so we're seeing calls that are arriving at the software but not being handled properly because we can't identify who the alarm is. We're seeing a call not received at the software simply because it's been ignored or it's arrived and hasn't handshaked properly. So that's about calls arriving to the platform, sorry, not to the platform, to the telephone switchboard of the council and then being delivered to the software or not delivered to the software. So the call failure is about not being delivered to the software or not being interpreted at the software. So whether it redials or not is it's not really worked. You know, if that'll be a successful call. Does that make sense? If it redials and it gets through, it becomes a successful call.
Have you know, where we really actually got a problem?
Sorry?
From a client point of view, have we actually got a problem? You know, what does the service user see?
I would have to say that would be a question for you and as a service provider to decide whether that's a risk you are willing to accept.
So you are saying a net failure rate, despite all those mechanisms, of 2.3%?
Yeah. I mean, irrespective of
Real failure rate.
which connectivity is there, the technology is working in a sense that it's in the home and it's delivering a call, but it's currently delivering that over a mix of copper and digital network. So as a consequence of that, the calls are arriving at the contact center, but they're not being processed by the software. So either through a corruption or through a...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Is there one last question? I got one that was tabled offline. Maybe I can take the liberty of closing with this one. It's a question for anyone of the colleagues here, actually. As we worked our way through the shift to digital, you've each talked around enabling technologies with new services. I'm interested to know whether you're seeing almost a different commercial model emerging, where a propensity for people to pay for new, better services, and this idea of some sort of co-payment model that might emerge. Have you seen any hints at that yet from what you've done?
Yeah, so we're being asked for a rental model. So we're working that up currently. And it's a tech refresh model as well. So this is about working with that customer over a longer period of time and providing the whole service end to end. So whether that be installation through to monitoring and provide the equipment CapEx free. So we are getting asked for that much more.
Great stuff, thank you.
Tim.
Okay, could you please say thank you to our panel?
Thank you.
And I just want to leave with a parting message. I guess what we're hearing here is we need to start. You know, we're set on a journey. Gordon's talked us through some of the dates there. What you're hearing here is messages from people at the sharp end, already starting to see issues. So we've got a little time to fix this, but not a lot of time. I think the message, you heard it loud and clear from various speakers today, including Beverly Bright, is start planning, do it now. thank you very much for all your time. If you've got any more thoughts on this, please drop a line to us at the TSA. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.